idea is true around the globe. We're all connected. And particularly in the age of climate change, the solutions to climate change require all of us to work together. And it's a big job. So the more of us that are working on these problems, the more chance we have to get things turned around. I believe it can be done, maybe not in my generation, but maybe in yours, or maybe in your children or your grandchildren's generation. But it's really an important endeavor, and I think it's something that we all need to work together on. So just wanted to say that about this photograph. As I alluded to, I am in the middle of a research sabbatical. So I convinced my partners in my company to let me go for a few months to explore ideas around the globe about urban resilience. And they were not convinced at first, but the more I talked about it, the more convinced they were. I think the final motivation is because they all realized that maybe they could do the same thing themselves later. So I maybe set a precedent for them. But the basis of my project is that the globe is changing. These temperature differentials we're now feeling throughout the globe. And those rapid changes in temperature are causing a lot of challenges. Cities themselves are being challenged through extreme heat, through flooding, through migration processes, as we have climate migrants that are escaping certain parts of the globe and moving into the large metropolises of the globe, like Cairo, like the Bay Area where I live. There's a lot of climate migration in my area. There's a lot of people coming from Central and South America who are arguably climate refugees. They're experiencing extreme conditions of different kinds in their home countries, and they're migrating into the U.S. to seek opportunity for themselves and their families. So there's a lot of pressure on cities right now because of all these factors. And so my project is to look at these factors in 4 different geographies. So I started last fall down here in Melbourne, Australia, and then I progressed to Central West India, where I spent time in 3 different cities in India, and that was last fall. Now this spring I'm beginning part 2, and here I am in Cairo, very happy to be here. I'm going to be going on to Beirut, Lebanon, after my visit here, and then I'm going to be going on to Northern Europe, where I'll be partnering with the University of Delft and involved in some activities around the region. But each of these places represent different geography and different outcomes of climate change. And each of them are responding to climate change in different ways. That's what I'm interested in. What are you experiencing in your region, and how are you responding? So I want your ideas. So that's why I'm here tonight, because not to talk to you, but to hear from all of you about how you're thinking about climate change and how you're responding with resilient strategies. So that's what my project is about. So my firm, just a little bit about it, we're about 100 people in 2 offices, Philadelphia and San Francisco. I'm in San Francisco. I'm a principal in the San Francisco office, and we have a team of about 20 people in San Francisco. And skipping down, the firm is made up of 4 disciplines. So we have planning, urban design, architecture, and landscape architecture. And that's how our firm was set up 60 years ago. It started 60 years ago this year, 1963. And it's always had these 4 disciplines. The architecture discipline is only in our Philadelphia office. So in San Francisco, we operate with the other 3, planning, urban design, and landscape architecture. I'm trained as a landscape architect, but in my career, I have migrated into sort of would say it's a mixed practice that involves looking at landscape and looking at urban fabric at different scales. So I work at the planning scale, maybe a citywide scale. I work at an urban design scale, which is a district of a city. And then I look at a public space design scale, and that's where my skills as a landscape architect come into play, to really design public space in response to all of the factors that I am understanding at these different scales, and then designing public space so that it is responsive to those factors. So I don't know, how many landscape architects are here? Okay, a few, that's good. So I have a bias coming from a landscape background. I would say to landscape architects, as the same thing I would say to any discipline, which is be a leader in thinking. No one owns the leadership position. It's available to any of you. And so whether you're a civil engineer, whether you're a landscape architect or a planner, be a leader. And what leadership involves is understanding the complexity of the issues and how all of these things are working together. And you can do that from a landscape architect's perspective. You can also do that from a civil engineer's perspective, and all of those perspectives are necessary. But the landscape architect, this is my own bias, is particularly well equipped for leadership because the way we're trained is to see issues holistically. How are all the systems related to each other? Systems of ecology, systems of social function, all of those things. So we have an advantage. So I like to work between disciplines, but I call landscape architecture my superpower. So it's what allows me to design and build things that are relevant to all the complexity of issues. So that's my soapbox. I'll get down from that now. The middle category is the 4 practice areas of our firm. So we actually don't like to talk about ourselves anymore in disciplines because we realize that by doing that, sometimes you did what I just did, is you spoke from only your perspective as a planner, as a landscape architect. When we work in the practice areas, we're bringing all the disciplines to our thinking. So our practice areas are community design, which is about the making of cities, and it's a big category. It's where I spend most of my time and energy in practice. Housing in neighborhoods is specifically focused on affordable housing. For the most part, it's housing in general, because housing is an important need for humans in the United States right now. We have a big challenge of housing supply, and especially affordable housing is a challenge. So we have a practice mainly based in Philadelphia, in our office there, that really focuses on the planning, the design, and the implementation of affordable housing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Parks and open space, just what it sounds like. And then education, which is our work with mainly higher education campuses, campus planning, and then the design of campus spaces. So we try to bring all 4 of our disciplines to bear on each of these practice areas, and we think we can be more effective if we're using all of our disciplines in collaboration to address these areas of practice. So WRT's practice ethos is rooted in ecological planning, social equity, and a community-based planning process. The firm was started by Ian McCarg, who was Professor Refat's reviewer, his examiner for his thesis project in school. I never had the privilege of meeting Ian McCarg, but he was certainly a leader in many ways. He was one of the founders of the environmental movement in the United States in the early 60s, and he had a lot of influence in that movement. He wrote this book, Design with Nature, which is about the ecological underpinnings of any planning or design project. So everything starts with ecology, according to Ian. Since then, we have added social systems as just as an important layer as ecology. But the two of those layers working together, ecology and social systems, are sort of the basis for all of our work. And that really is a strong legacy of the McCart philosophy that still carries through today. As I said before, we work across scales and professional disciplines to create forward-thinking, actionable solutions that meet the unique needs of the communities that we serve. We've received many awards. We're very fortunate to have been recognized for a lot of our work over the years. This is just a summary of some of those things. And tonight I want to talk about the notion of resilient communities and what does that mean exactly. So WRT views resilience as a holistic approach to the interrelated factors of community health and well-being. This is a little bit, there are several definitions of resilience now that are swirling around our industry. And one definition focuses on coastal issues, sea level rise, coastal flooding. It's very specific. And I would say in the United States, that is maybe the dominant view of resilience. But I think we think of resilience in a broader sense. It could be any number of factors that are putting pressure and stress on a community. And then how can we help that community be more resilient to those pressures and that stress? This is part of a more timeless challenge to create environments that help communities survive and thrive in the context of change. This challenge is now more urgent than ever as we face the increasing effects of climate change. Things are changing faster and faster and faster, so you can see that, from 10 years ago and now. So it's urgent. We have some work to do. So what are the elements of resilience that we see in our practice? There are 5, we think. And I'm also, just to, as a side note, just from my first research last fall, I'm realizing clearly that there are more than 5. There's other factors that we haven't been thinking about enough, and I'm happy to be gaining that knowledge from my research. And so you all should think about what's missing here and what do we need to make sure that we're paying attention to make our communities more resilient. But the 5 that we think most about are social equity, mobility, ecology and green infrastructure, which we're putting together, and there are reasons for that, public health and open space, and economic vitality. Our practice helps protect communities from a wide range of impacts, whether they are related to severe weather, wildland fires, long-term sea level rise, changing economies, or are social in their root causes. So crises and stresses can be many different things. In California right now, we're having a lot of issue with wildfires. It has nothing to do with the coastline. These wildfires are coming from inland. So our communities are being squeezed now between sea level rise on one side and wildfires coming from the hills on the other side. And it's happening all around California. It's an inland issue, but it's also a coastal issue. Other communities experience different kinds of stresses. They might be social stresses. They might be drought related. After several years of drought, a community becomes under pressure just because they have a shortage of water. And that suggests a different kind of resilience that we need to develop to withstand those factors. Communities with a strong foundation of these elements are more successful in adapting to change and responding to challenges. So if you're paying attention to all of these, your community has a much better chance of being ready for the next impact or ready for the next stress. Social equity. Equitable communities are fundamentally more successful across a range of economic, social, and cultural indicators, and ultimately more resilient to a wide range of impacts. Thriving communities have access to education, a diversity of jobs, healthy food, clean air and water, parks and open space. From this foundation, communities are ultimately more resilient to a wide range of impacts, both socioeconomic and natural. So, just an example of how we are looking at social equity in our practice. We have a big challenge in California right now, and it's housing supply. We don't have enough housing for all of our population, and it's across the board. It's market rate housing, it's affordable housing, and those at the bottom of the housing ladder are being pushed out into the streets. And so we have a big homeless population in most American cities right now. So it's a big problem. We're trying to tackle that in many different ways. But in our practice in San Francisco, we're helping communities figure out where they can build new housing. And so this is one of those studies. It's a town called Millbrae. It's in the Bay Area. And we help them place housing strategically in their community while respecting the scale and character of their community, but still meeting the demands of new housing. The crisis has gotten so bad in California that the state now has intervened and placed mandates on the number of new houses every community must build. So every community now has a mandate to build housing. And so our clients now are cities that are coming to us and they're saying, where do we put it? You know, we don't have room. And then we can go in and we can say, well, yes, actually you do have room. Let's look at the texture and the fabric of your community, and let's figure out where to place housing sensitively so that it actually is a benefit. It's a community builder rather than an imposition on your community. So we have a lot of studies like this. Along with the placement of infill is that if the infill is truly, if it has social equity, it has to be accessible. And accessibility has to do with connecting people to their housing in ways that don't mandate an automobile. The automobile, unfortunately, has destroyed many American cities, and now we're paying the price for that. So we're trying to backtrack now and offer other modes of access, other modes of travel for people to connect to their jobs and to their houses. So active transportation, transit, all kinds of other modes of mobility are part of the social equity equation. This is a project in Santa Clara, in Silicon Valley, where the downtown was demolished in the 1960s under an urban renewal strategy because they wanted to build a mall downtown. And the mall was never built. And so this community has not had a downtown, a center of their community ever since for 50 or 60 years. And so we were hired to help them conceptualize a new downtown. So the first thing was to figure out a new street pattern, and this was really about reconnecting the street grid from the adjacent neighborhoods and defining points of public space along that street grid. The next was to identify ground floor uses that brought vitality and activation to those streets. So these are retail, what we're calling retail ready, but also entertainment and cultural uses, and where those are placed on the ground floor on the street in order to activate the new network of streets. And then the next was the infill that is on the upper floors of those infill buildings. So these are residential buildings in yellow, office buildings in blue. The purple building is a hotel that serves a nearby university. And then you can see all the ground floor activators on the street level throughout this fabric. And then, very importantly, we're looking not only at placing these blocks of land uses, but how those are related to the street. How are the ground floor uses and the street working together to be active social spaces? So a lot of the detail here about outdoor dining and about bike parking, bike lanes. We don't even use the term parking lane anymore. We call that the multi-use curb lane because there are many different kinds of uses that are competing for the use of the curb. Deliveries, service, bike parking, parklets for outdoor dining and gathering. So all of those uses are competing for curb space. So the parking cars has become a much lower priority for that lane. So that's just one of the ways that we're thinking about streets and equitable access. This is one of our projects that really plays on these different principles that I've been talking about. This is an affordable housing project and a student housing project in Philadelphia. This was designed by our architecture team in Philadelphia. It's next to transit, next to the university. It has ground floor activating uses. It has a high quality of public space along the street. So it's, I think, one of the successful projects in terms of some of the principles that I've mentioned. Okay, the second element is ecology and green infrastructure. Ecological systems are the backbone networks of our Earth's vital functions, ensuring clean air, clean water, carbon sequestration, and the biodiversity that supports all living organisms, including humans. So green infrastructure solutions seek to narrow the gap between natural ecosystems and engineered infrastructure. So we're trying to bring those two worlds together. Not everything needs to be hard pipe infrastructure. Many infrastructure functions can be handled with green systems, and they have multiple benefits in terms of health and in terms of habitat and water quality in our watersheds. We're looking at green infrastructure and ecology interventions throughout the Bay Area, where my office is in San Francisco. As I said, this is an interconnected organism of communities. We all live together around the Bay, and so we're all trying to coordinate our efforts for how we deal with green infrastructure systems. This is a project in the North Bay where we are restoring a marsh by de-channelizing the creek that goes into the marsh because it had been not allowing for siltation to rebuild the marsh. A marsh will actually rebuild itself in response to sea level rise if you let it. Natural systems are made to do their own evolution and repair. If you channelize everything, you're preventing nature from doing its own work. And so this is an example of one of those projects where we're returning this back to a natural system. This is a new campus for UC Berkeley that we did some planning for. And what's important here is that we understood the different stages of sea level rise, and we integrated those different natural systems into the campus plan to be part of its open space. So allowing some of that flooding to come in and out, but making that part of an open space system for a campus. So a little bit different way of looking at campus open space. And then this is a project that I worked on very much. This is a project I was in charge of as landscape architect, which is the new campus for Microsoft in Silicon Valley. And it was a very complex project, but at its heart, it was an ecological restoration of an old, outdated office park. This was a park office park that was built in the 1980s, which was tilt-up, two-story buildings surrounded by surface parking, sort of the worst site plan that one could imagine for a work environment, for a collaborative environment, if you will. So to Microsoft's credit, they wanted to redesign and reinvent this campus, and it was largely an effort in ecological restoration. So this is where the campus is located. A lot of its big neighbors are Google and Apple and other tech companies that are all in this area. And Microsoft is actually a small player in Silicon Valley because their main campus is in Redmond, Washington. So they really needed to show everyone that they were there. So there's a lot of competition between these different tech campuses. They're all trying to be the best ecologically, the best work environment. And the reason for that is because they're all trying to attract talent, and having a very livable campus is part of attracting talent to their company. So understanding where this sits in the broader ecosystem is where we began. So the South Bay is a complex ecosystem made of tidal flats to tidal marsh, to wet meadow, to willow grove, and finally, as you get up to the higher ground, to oak woodland. And we tried to understand how those different ecosystems, and you can see them in the photographs across the top, how they related to the campus itself, and how we could bring threads of those different ecologies into the campus landscape. So if you look at the top cross-section, this is how nature was working before the 1980s office park was built. There was a lot of ecological function, there was a lot of production of oxygen, sequestration of carbon, filtering of water, creation of habitat. A lot of benefits were being provided by the ecosystems here. And when the office parks were built in the middle cross-section, all of that function was lost. Maybe a little bit was still there, but most of it was lost. So our plan for the campus was to group together the built areas, group together the parking into a structure, and free up much more open space between buildings so that we could restore some of the ecological function that used to exist there and bring back a lot of those ecosystem services that were once provided. So these are the ecosystem services. I think maybe you've all seen this definition of provisioning services, regulating services, and cultural services, all provided by ecology, by natural systems. If you let them do their job, you'll get all these benefits from them. So that was sort of our mantra for designing the landscape, is to try to get as many of these back as we could. And we looked literally one layer at a time of each ecosystem service and said, asked ourselves the question, how are we going to optimize any of these factors? What's the optimal way to produce food, the optimal way to protect against extreme events, the optimal way to improve air quality? And we tried to be very deliberate with each of these layers, and then that was integrated into the landscape design. And so what we were left with was a campus that was quite rustic on the perimeter. You know, nature is not tidy, right? It's not manicured. It's informal and it's rustic, and you have to let it be that. It's okay. Nature wants to be messy sometimes, but it filters water, it creates habitat, it does all of these beneficial things if you let it. So the exterior of campus, the perimeter, is really dominated by this ecological restoration. The interior is more what we think of as a campus, where we have social spaces. It's a little bit more formal, a little bit more manicured. And then even on the interior of that, the new building itself was a large 2-story workspace, all open floor plan, because all of the teams want to be able to see each other across a very broad floor plate. But the large floor plate is punctuated by these courtyards, so everyone has access to light and air. They can get out into the courtyards, they can come up to the green roof. The whole new building is covered with a green roof, and that is part of the open space. It's all usable. You can go up there, you can go to the rooftop cafe under that canopy. It's all a usable part of the campus landscape. And so here you can see the green roof. There's all of this area here in the center. You can see all of the courtyards that are punching down through the green roof. And then on the perimeter, all this, we're connecting to the creek, the regional creek that goes here in the lower left. And then that ecology then is carried into the perimeter of the campus. The third element I want to talk about is mobility. So I mentioned this before as I was referring to social equity, but mobility is what connects us all to the things we need to lead healthy and fulfilling lives. Circulation networks ensure that our homes are efficiently connected to our jobs, recreation, food supply, vital services, and cultural experiences. In a resilient community, mobility networks emphasize active transportation, walking, bicycling, things that are active and healthy, and transit, things that are efficient and can move mass numbers of people easily and efficiently and smoothly, and that minimize carbon footprint. So carbon footprint is more like private automobiles that have internal combustion engines. We're trying to move away from that towards mass transit, towards walking and so forth, and towards electric vehicles, and that's starting to happen. So this is a project just south of San Francisco that we developed an urban plan for. It's a brownfield site, but it's close to the city and connected to the city and the region by some important transit networks. And so then it became a very good candidate for infill development because it had that transit connection. So this is the urban plan that we developed, and the way that plan was conceived was through sort of a very typically McCartneyan process of looking at layers of influences, and then layers of networks that support land uses, and then layers of land uses. So this is sort of how we go through the design process, just thinking of things in layers. But in particular, the circulation, the mobility layers were an important framework for this project. So you can see where all of the transit facilities are grouped into the northern area of this site. So we have a regional commuter train, we have a BRT that is planned, and then we have a light rail connection coming from the north, from San Francisco, all the way down to this area. And those three transit threads are coming together in one place. And right where they come together, that's where we want to put the density. So we connect to those facilities by a street network that has different hierarchies of walkable streets, a bike and pedestrian framework, and then the land use that layers on top of that. So with the higher densities grouped all the way to the north, and then as you go south, lower densities and much more public open space, green space. So that was the structure of the plan. And so this was the resulting plan, and then this is an illustration of one of the resulting neighborhoods in the northern area of the site. So this is a transit-oriented neighborhood. It balances different types of mobility and places the density that can take advantage of those transit resources. And then public health and open space. We do a lot of park designs as landscape architects. That's something that we like to do, and something that our firm is known for. Creating environments where people can be assured of clean air, clean water, access to healthy food, open space, and exercise, as well as vital support services, will ensure socially and economically vital communities. So this is a park in a new development area in San Francisco. It also was a brownfield site. This was an area called Mission Bay. It used to be a bay, and it was filled with earthquake rubble from the 1906 earthquake. And then a rail yards was built on top of the earthquake rubble. So it has a legacy of ecology, then railroad and industry, and now redevelopment. So it's sort of a second chapter in the history of this land. The park itself, Mariposa Park, sits between two older neighborhoods to the south, Potrero Hill and Dogpatch, and then the new Mission Bay neighborhood in the north. So it's really a park that serves three neighborhoods, and we met with all three neighborhoods to figure out what they wanted in their neighborhood park. This is looking at the pattern of the old rail yards and some of the influences of that geometry. Those old industrial alignments became influences to our park design. This lower photograph is a turntable. So the train pulls onto the turntable, it turns around, and then the train goes into the shed to be repaired. So that turntable became the inspiration for this circular plaza in the northeast corner of the site. And then there were other themes here of butterflies. Mariposa means butterfly in Spanish, so there were a lot of butterfly references in the design, and there was also a butterfly habitat for an endangered butterfly that is part of this region. And then one of the unique opportunities about this project was that we could use unlimited amount of fill. So we could actually do a lot of earth sculpture, and we could put a greater amount of fill near the freeway to help block the noise and filter the air with tree plantings from the freeway. So they had excess fill for the general construction, and so we were able to utilize that in the design of the park. This was just an artist's view of the park itself. This is the completed park. You can see it's in a very industrial neighborhood, but a very rapidly changing neighborhood. This is an artist's conception of that turntable plaza, and then this is the completed plaza. You can see the butterfly habitat wrapping around this side of the site. Again, it's very rustic, very messy, but in fact has become productive in terms of the fauna that are attracted here. And then this is some social space happening in the turntable plaza. And then lastly, the last element of resilience is economic vitality. People need to have opportunity so that they can have fulfilling lives for themselves, for their families, and economic vitality is an important part of resiliency. And the more diverse of an economy that we can create, the more resilient it can be to economic cycles in the broader economy. So I wanted to just end with this project, which is it's a redesign of a corridor in a very suburban community in the Bay Area. It's called Castro Valley, and this was the old state route, but this state route became redundant when they built a freeway nearby, but they never changed the scale and the design of the state route, so it was still very not very pedestrian oriented, very dominated by automobiles. So our assignment was to both revitalize this as the downtown for this community, and then figure out where they could do strategic and surgical infill. This was done according to 3 different themes and 3 different areas. So there was one area that was more of a theater and entertainment district. The center one is more of a shopping district, bringing storefronts closer to the street wall. And then the third on the right here was a civic district that had a library at its center. And then all of those were tied together with a new street corridor. And so this was redesigned very much as a pedestrian corridor, bicycle corridor, and with a heavy intervention of green infrastructure. So this is one of our first projects that we had quite a aggressive approach to green infrastructure. We implemented things here that we had not tried on other projects before. Things like a continuous soil trench under all the street trees so that all the root zones are connected to each other. A lot of permeable paving in the tree strip and also in the parking strip so that the water can get through the pavement down into the soil zone and to the root zone. Rain gardens at the ends of all the blocks so that rainwater can come and collect and then infiltrate down into the subsoil. And all of this makes better ecological function, better habitat, better water quality, and it's all an interconnected system of green infrastructure. And this is some of the completed work. You can see the rain gardens here, and you can see some of the new social activity that started to happen along the public street. And then the greatest reward for this is when private industry then comes in and does their own investment. So all of this was done by a private property owner who purchased a vacant warehouse building and turned it into a food hall market and redeveloped this alley next to it as a gathering place where they could have outdoor music and you could buy your food in the market inside and sit out and enjoy it in this outdoor environment. And this has become a real center for the community. As I get to know Cairo, I'm staying in the Baba Luke district. This seems like such a basic thing. I observe so much of this happening in Baba Luke, the pedestrian streets with outdoor dining. It really is working so successfully. So I think I have a lot to learn from Cairo, and I look forward to learning more throughout my stay. So we're collaborators. In order for our work to be successful, it requires partnering with a broad range of disciplines. We engage our partners for their critical expertise in such areas as hydrology, engineering, ecology, transportation, and economics. We look forward to a continuing dialogue in this exciting quest to create more resilient communities. Shukran.